Yeah, this all is tied back to the escape back in May. Obviously, 10 detainees ultimately making it out of the jail. Hutson now faces a slew of charges related to that incident. Now, the Attorney General put out a memo. I guess I want to read it in part here. This is, in some ways, a conclusion on an investigation that began in the immediate aftermath of the escape. While Sheriff Hutson did not personally open the doors of the jail for the escapees, her refusal to comply with basic legal requirements and to take even minimal precautions in the discharge of her duties directly contributed to and enabled the escape. As for a breakdown of some of the charges themselves, I have to pull up the list here. It's 30, as was touched on a second ago. It includes malfeasance in office, conspiracy to commit malfeasance in office, filing or maintaining false public records, conspiracy to commit filing or maintaining false public records, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit obstruction of justice. Right now, her bond stands at $300,000. Meanwhile, her chief financial officer, Bianca Brown, her bond stands at $200,000. Both individuals ultimately had to give up their passports to stay within the state of Louisiana. There's actually going to be a hearing on this situation tomorrow morning. But as for the Attorney General, her attention now turns in part to Michelle Woodfork, the incoming sheriff. She released a statement reading in part, "As my prosecutors move forward with this case, Woodfork on how to improve operations, secure the facility, and build in basic financial oversight that complies with state law." For her part, Woodfork just released a statement reading in part, "This Monday, I will assume leadership of the Sheriff's Office with a firm commitment to transparency, or accountability, transparency, and integrity." In her statement, she also notes she has not gotten an opportunity to review the indictment in full. So again, to sum up, Sheriff Hutson will be here tomorrow morning to appear in court, and ultimately we'll hopefully learn more about what exactly transpired here. I have been in touch with the Attorney General's office for more information about a narrative or more context related to these charges. The Attorney General's office says that they will not be releasing that arrest narrative at this point. Of course, we may learn more about that situation down the road. Reporting in New Orleans, Chris Joseph, Fox 8, Local First.